Hey, it's Chris. What are we doing? Well, you're about to see my own personal hotness, right? Things that are new, especially in a smaller format. Let's go. 5 Essen-ish releases. My thoughts on them, mini review style. Rapid fire. Let's go. So what do you need to know about Cascadia Landmarks? Well, Cascadia Landmarks only adds a few things that are going to be of note here, and a few things done extremely well, and we'll talk about the pros and cons here. So the two things that you're essentially paying for are 2 mini expansions sort of thrown together, one of which you may or may not want, depending on your own personal preference and playstyle. Well, one of them is you're just going to be paying for an extra content, right? It's a 5 to 6 player expansion matched up with some gameplay content. Do you want to pay a little bit extra for a 5 to 6 player mode? Which, you know, works, but it's a little bit more streamlined as well if you want some additional rules to sort of cut the edge off in terms of the downtime. Well, they've got that. The other thing that they're giving you here is that they're giving you more asymmetric animal scoring conditions for the point salad that this game is a little bit in that sense. And they all are awesome. And so you get like 3 additional ones, and that's the other big gameplay element to go along with, well, say the landmarks. And the landmarks are relatively straightforward, right? You've got your little wooden cutout meeple versions here, and essentially all you're doing, if you're familiar with the base game, is your usual, I'm gonna draft one of these, place it there, put the animal down. I'm gonna draft one of these, place it there, put the animal down. Now, once you get an area, say of 5 of these tiles, so that you have maybe another one here, and then you get another one over here, we'll put it like this, and then you essentially have an area of 5. But that last one that you would put down, let's say instead of putting down one of your animals, in this case, of the caribou, with that last one that ends there, you're going to actually take the little meeple. Then this meeple is going to correspond to one of the victory point cards that's going to be available to you. And you're going to have 1 victory point card here, condition, for every player that's in the game in the first place. So for all the mountains, the waters, the prairies, they're all going to have asymmetric ways of scoring. And herein lies the blessing curse of these scoring cards. As you can see here, this one scores 1 point for every fox or salmon in the mountain. Well, you know what? There aren't always fox and salmon in mountains that get pulled. And so if you just don't pull those tiles from the bag, or those are part of the tiles that you didn't include in this game, in this round, in this time, well, it just may not be as worthwhile, you know. And that's also why the first game me and my wife played with this, we didn't even use the landmarks at all. Not because we didn't want to, but because they weren't always as applicable as the conditions of the cards that were set out in front of us in that game were allowing us to be. That may be, your mileage may vary as well. And so it's not a component that adds too much. It doesn't over complexify things. It just works really, really well. It gives you another option on the small point buffet that is Cascadia in the first place. I'm never going to play without it. Is it going to be incorporated and utilized every game? And that kind of goes into how complete or integrated is it on a round by round, turn by turn, game by game basis. And if you want an expansion that does that, well, this may not be fully to your suiting, but if you don't mind how incorporated it is at times, this absolutely freaking works, and it's awesome. So again, not going anywhere, not even going to be separated from the base game anymore. Next up, what do we got going on? Furnace, but not alone, because we have the Interbellum Expansion. What do you need to know about this engine building furnace factory building game? Well, it's card driven, as you can see here. And essentially what you're doing on a turn by turn basis is you get to take your little bidding marker here and you get to place it over whatever card you want. And if you're the highest number on that card at the end of the round, you get to take the card. And you can utilize it not only for the resources that it's going to give you, or potentially the resource management that it's going to provide for you as well, because this is a game of resource optimization. These cards are multi-purpose. The top, the bottom, they are all being utilized in several different clever ways. The bottom, you get those resources right away. The bottom, if it gets flipped over and upgraded, then you get that ability as well. The top, well, let's say you are not the white person here. You are the yellow here, and you have the lower bid. Well, you get compensated and you get the top. So bidding is not for naught. That is the big problem with bidding auction games in the first place, right? You lose and you lose. Well, this game actually rewards you. So sometimes you may want the reward at the top more than you want the reward at the bottom. And that's kind of cool, because the other thing is you can't have more than one number on the same card. So that one, noops, not allowed, gonna have to be this one. So even more than one person could get the secondary reward compensation if they're so choosing to do so. There's even an AI system that allows you to roll a die and see where the AI card is going to go along the 6 card row per round. That's it. Rinse and repeat. Score the most victory points at the end of your 3 basic resources that you're going to be utilizing. See? 1, 2, 3. Now, what does Interbellum add? What does Interbellum add? What do you need to know about it? Is it that useful? Well, yeah, it's got a few clever mechanisms. One, it's just got more cards, and that's what all engine builders need. The problem with engine builders in general is if you don't have enough cards, the meta gets kind of stale. You start to know all the cards, it starts to get more rote and routine, and you don't really get into how can I adapt. The greatest thing about these games in the first place is how do I strategically adapt to what's given in front of me in a tactical manner. And if you don't have enough cards, well, then people kind of only go for the same ones and it becomes the same thing over there and it gets very dry. And so Interbellum mixes that up, but they're just giving you more cards. The other thing that we didn't really talk about here is you have these asymmetric managers. And guess what? They can all rule break in several different ways. And so depending on which one you want to rule break with this game, this expansion actually gives you more. So that allows you to manipulate things even more to your choosing. And in case that wasn't enough, we have one other little element here that has to be talked about. Now, you notice that I have a 1 through 4 bidding previously, but all of a sudden I have another bidder here. Oh, what's this? 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, 4. I can bid whatever I want with this, and this one's variable. But if I want to bid extra coal as a resource, I can make it as high as I want when I'm doing the bidding phase in the first place. Now all of a sudden, my 1 can outperform your 4 with my special 1. The base game alone sort of allows you to stretch your wings a little bit if you're not familiar with engine building. It sort of gives you a nice little 3 resource system. But Interbellum is the thing that actually makes a good game much better. And I hate saying that at the same time because I always feel weird when I say an expansion is a must-have for a game in the first place, right? And it's not a must-have, but it's going to give this game more legs after half a dozen to 10 plays. Now, your mileage may vary. How many times do you play the games in your collection? 6 to 10 times before doing anything else with them. And so that's going to be the question, is if this game really works for you in the first place from an engine building standpoint as a very solid engine builder, but nothing spectacular to the base game, this expansion is going to give it a little bit more legs with more cards, a little bit more dynamic bidding with the overbidding essentially, as well as a few more different asymmetric managers that are going to make it or break it for you. So overall, very solid game, but again, mixed mileage varying here if you have to recommend an expansion to make it stay in your collection in the first place. Next up, Neotopia from Arcane Wonders. A very interesting area control sort of tile placement set collection, if you will, all thrown together. And essentially what you've got going on here is you've got a little area control via 1 of 4 colors. And so you're going to be utilizing these tiles, putting them into the area wherever you so choose next to other tiles in order to create configurations matching the cards that you're going to be holding in your hand. These cards will have an arrangement on them anywhere from about 3 to 5 different shapes on them in order to get the victory points that are offered in the lower left-hand corner. The spin on this is everybody's going to be playing in one of 3 different areas all at the same time simultaneously. You're going to be scoring in all 3 of the areas as well. You're also going to have tiles in the middle here. They're going to be only coming out when one of these sides is completely depleted. Then you flip this tile in the center over, you see what's on the other side, that populates the new tile below it. So when these sides and these tiles get populated, well, that's going to be really the tactical decision making along with sort of the manipulation of other people's arrangements on the board in the first place with a little bit of take that potentially of messing up other people's plans. And you'll also notice you have some bonus tiles around here that allow you to essentially take extra tiles from the reserve, take bonus actions, or manipulate those tiles in the same way, including gathering more of these cards from the market because there are only really 2 actions in this game. It's move a tile, grab a card. You fulfill the conditions, play the card, get the points. That's really it in a nutshell. Also, the scoring track, you'll notice, has little highlighted areas. You score your first one across one of those highlighted areas, get a free bonus token. There's only so many in each area, though, so your mileage may vary. The end scoring is a little bit funky, though. You take your 2 highest scores, and then you take 3 times your lowest score as well. And that's the sum total of things you've got going on. And so that's a little wonky to me. I'm sure there was plenty of research done into it though. And so that's the only thing that may be a little bit off-putting. Otherwise, it's a fantastic game of sort of spatial manipulation with these tiles because the game only goes until the last tile is flipped face up, you get to the finish line, and then everybody gets one last turn. And it's an interesting timing mechanism as well that I kind of like, to be frank. Again, it's a very interesting dynamic player count because just like Furnace, you're going to have different things going on at the lower player counts as well as the higher player counts. Higher player counts, your turns are going to be much less, your scores are going to be much less, and your ability to manipulate the board state is going to be way too random for some people. But on the 2-player side of things, you have perfect information almost based on everything except for what your opponent may have in their hand. And so you may really like more of the control aspect of the lower elements if that's your ilk. But if you like some crazy chaos spatial arrangements with a highly tactical board, the higher player counts are going to fulfill that from that side of things. And the timing of when you fill up, how you fill up, in what order you do so, including slowly filling up the sides here until you get one of these bonus tokens, can be very satisfying. It can also be very influential in terms of the game swinging back and forth. And so it's going to have some of those elements too that, again, if you like it, it does an excellent job at it. But otherwise, this could be a big miss for people if you're concerned more about the chaos factor, the non-controlling factor, or the, you know what, my plans are going to be completely screwed up, and you know what, we're playing with 4 people, and so it's going to be 3 more turns before the board gets back around to me, and my cards in my hand aren't going to be useful for me anymore based on what I drew them for in the first place because they only had 2 actions last round in order to do them. And so, again, your mileage is going to vary there. But especially at the lower player counts, which would be my preferred, I think it works quite nicely. The other small point that may seem trivial, right, is when you play one of these point cards, when you make one of these spatial arrangements in this area in the first place, right, you lay it in the discard pile in that specific area of one of the 3 different quadrants. And so what you're doing, though, is potentially something that may be very irritating, may not be, because you look at this and how you determine whether or not they're being played again in that area is you can't have the same one on the top of the discard pile. And that may sound trivial when I scroll through all of these and you don't see tons of duplicates. There's a fair number of different ones overall, but I'll be frank with you, it definitely happens. And when it happens to you, that can also be the make it or break it between this low point scoring game of who gets the most points in that area, also who doesn't. And so that can be very frustrating in terms of planning. Also, like I said, at the 3 times the lowest score in that area as the end game victory condition for the sum total of it, that can be very frustrating because if that discrepancy in your 3rd area is the highest, that's a very, very big point swing, even if your other 2 areas are potentially much closer to other people's. The other main point scoring issue, again, I can see people being divided on, is each of these areas, depending on the largest grouping of your particular color, you're actually going to get bonus points for that as well, which is really kind of cool in some ways, but at the same time, when you're trying to pattern match to get the majority of your points in the first way with these cards, you're not nearly thinking about the size of this area, but you're really more looking at this on a turn-by-turn basis. So it's easy to overlook this, and that may also appease to people, or that may frustrate people at the same time. Next up, we have the point salad, actually sequel, literally metaphorically speaking there, point city. And this is an interesting twist on things because it gives you more of a grid-based approach, as you can see here, that you're going to be slowly managing resources on one side of the card, as well as building the buildings that are going to engine build on the other side of the card. And depending on what card you pull, if you pull, say, a resource card, then the next card that comes out is actually going to be a building, and vice versa. And that gives a different dynamic in this grid-based system that you're maybe not used to. And the creation of this sort of brings some chaos because you'll notice that, you know, this is a leaf energy ecology side of things on one card, but on the other side of things, it has the leaf emblem there, but what you need to actually play it as a building is completely different. What's nice is the lower levels, well, they basically are what they are. So if you get an industry card, it's going to give you the industry engine build. It gives you a limited resource that you can use on a turn-by-turn basis. But as you can start to get to level 2 and level 3 cards, the complexity increases. You get more resources, you get the ingenuity, which is a catch-all for any one resource, no matter what or how many are needed in that sense. But you start flipping them over, and it doesn't correspond nearly as nicely on the building side of things to what is going on. And so the coordination between one side to the other is not going to be straightforward, and so you're not going to necessarily know what's waiting for you on this deck upcoming. The ingenuity is really nice because it's sort of a catch-all, allowing you to sort of play cards and build buildings that you wouldn't be able to do otherwise, because the system is actually relatively straightforward. Do 2 things. You either grab 2 cards that are adjacent to each other, or you grab 2 cards that are adjacent to each other. But what those cards are, you know, I said the same thing twice, because you can only do that. You can grab resources, you can grab buildings, but you have to be able to grab adjacently, orthogonally, in order to do it. It doesn't matter if you take this one first and then use it to play this, or you build this one and then you take this resource. That's all you've got going on, and you go until basically the cards run out, depending on the number of the players. Is going to depend on how many cards are in the deck in the first place. 1, 2s, and 3s, and then you have the side little victory points over here as well once you go for building one of these buildings that has one of these little things at the top in the first place. Then you also have the little side conditions here, a little bit of extra victory points at the end, besides the number of points in the upper right-hand corner, because some of these in the upper left-hand corner will have this symbol instead, and it allows you to draw one of these asymmetric end-game scoring victory conditions. Again, your mileage is going to vary because some of them may be super helpful in terms of the pairings, and some of them may just not come out. So that's going to be the mixed bag in this mixed deck, if you will, of sometimes you just get the right combination of things because the right resources come out in the right combinations, and sometimes these don't correlate to the ones you're getting because you're getting the opposite ones. And how engine building can you do in this 3rd engine building game series I seem to be on at this point? Is it fun? Yeah, it's kind of fun. Is it nice? Yeah, it's kind of nice. Is it the most complex game? No. Is it going to change your mind if you weren't a fan of Point Salad? Well, it's better than Point Salad. I have no qualms about telling you that. But there's also more chaos than you might like in sort of your engine resource management style game. Not that the deck utilizes it, but the cleverness of the double-sided cards in this case is also a little bit of a double-edged sword, because as you go out and later in the game, you can't necessarily tell which side of the card is going to be more behooving of your engine that you're building in the first place. And so that could leave people a little bit wanting when the right card pops up for the next person and your card just doesn't pop up, especially at the higher player counts, and this board is going to change dramatically there, just like in Neotopia, like I just mentioned. So it's a great game, it's a nice filler, but will it stand the test of time? That one, the jury is still out on as well. Oh, and one last point of note, with those little endgame scoring tokens that I mentioned, there were some extras to the Kickstarter content, if you will. You're not going to miss them, so don't worry about if you got the retail versus the crowdfunding side of things. Next up, Sinister Fish Games. Their latest crowdfunding project to be delivered, Moon with the Valkyrie Expansion. As you can see here, we've got a lot of card situation going on in this offspring sort of Seven Wonders meets It's a Wonderful World, only more with a heavy worker placement vibe. Because essentially what you've got going on is you've got round by round, you're going to be drafting these cards in sort of an action tableau engine builder style, if you will, where all of these cards are going to be multi-use. And what you'll notice here is you have cards that are very symbology heavy, but they all have multi-purpose uses. And that's because you're going to be slowly building them based off of the resources that are along the top, but they'll produce the resources along the bottom, but they also additionally have worker placement spots for your little moon rovers. This is what you're producing every turn. This is what you get if you trash the card instead of building it on the turn. And you're just going to have a whole smorgasbord of cards in general. And basically what you're doing is just that. You're taking your hand of potentially up to 8 cards on a turn-by-turn basis, drafting one of them, and then passing it. And so as you're taking these, you're going to be able to utilize them either, as I mentioned, the build or the play action. And so then you get to slowly engine build as you go through the rounds, and the rounds end when your hand runs out. Now, some of these cards actually provide you additional optional actions like the pink ones, where you can flip them once per round in terms of extra actions, resources, or even bonus points. But this is very symbology heavy. You have 4 main resources that you're going to be dealing with here that you can see right here, but then also your victory points. And this is a little bit strange because your victory points are going to actually be ongoing with some of these other pink cards in the first place, because they're going to change as the rounds change. You're just going to store some of them up additionally. And these rovers that I mentioned, these rovers are your workers, right? But these workers actually, wherever you place them, they stay. And so if you place them on someone else's card, which you can do to gather resources if you don't have quite enough to worker placement your own sort of buildings, well, then the next round, when they're all collected, that person gets however many that are there. And yeah, they're going to get you points. Yeah, they're going to be endgame scoring conditions. Yeah, they're going to be helpful. So when, how, and where you choose to do them definitely matters. As you can see in front of me, I've got just sort of the whole tableau set up, if you will. Rounds 1, 2, and 3 consecutively. The other element, the other complexity of this game, which sets it apart from those other two, is that this is a game that is going to take the whole length of your game night potentially. And that's both the biggest boon and the biggest curse at the same time. If you ever thought Seven Wonders was too light, or It's a Wonderful World is too light, or those types of games with the drafting, the engine, the set collection, if you will, well, this game is going to give you more. But the question is sometimes is, do you want more? You're going to have achievements that are going to be able to be unlocked here, and you're going to be getting additional bonus points or ways of mitigating depending on what you get to unlock them, but also when you claim them, giving you additional ways of scoring that can be one claimed or ongoing abilities, as you can see here too. And several of these will be out on a round by round basis, and they stay out if they're not claimed in the first round, for example, until someone does claim them. Now, then you also have this board here at the top, and this is going to be the other resource that I did not mention. We talked about the 4 main resources here, but you also have flags on all of these building cards, or a majority of these building cards in the first place. And these flags here are going to actually give you additional ways of resource management, because it's also going to set collect at the end. You have the most of them, you get the victory points that are played here. But if there's a tie, they actually potentially stay there until the next round and build up in another way. Now, the Valkyrie expansion adds these little spaceships here, and you get to play them over on your board to launch your little spaceship in order to get better bonuses the earlier you launch them. And the Valkyrie expansion comes with additional expedition cards. And these expedition cards are very much like the base game ones in the sense that you're going to get one of these in a hand in a round. But these cards actually pass along with your building cards, because they're going to give you an ability that you can use every single round that you're drafting a card, in addition to give you a little bit of supplement asymmetry as you're going along. So that's kind of cool. And the first player one is always straightforward one that is staying round to round. So you have a little bit of balance there with a little bit of craziness going on all at the same time. You have your base here that's going to be asymmetric, and you're going to be slowly stacking up your blue cards, your yellow cards, and then your pink and gray cards over to the side, again in a set collection type manner that's going to behoove you depending on what your base is best at. Now, like I mentioned, you're going to be drafting up to 8 cards from these hands, and so there's a little bit of, well, thought process that's going to need to go in these. As I mentioned, both the what it takes to build, if you want to scrap it, or if you want to actually build it and get the resources or the symbols that are down here that are going to benefit you, not only for the building of later things, but also those set collections that I mentioned at the end of round scoring. And so trying to figure out which one of these potentially up to 8 cards or more in your hand, along with one of these special abilities that's going to mitigate things here, taking an assimilation reward from the current hand, so I can take one of these trash card rewards just for free. Yeah, what combination there do I want to do? Or am I going to take one of my little workers and place it on somebody else's at the same time in order to gain more resources and then to build something in this hand that maybe I couldn't build otherwise? Rinse and repeat that over 3 rounds, and you're going to see why this potentially can take you up to 2 hours to play, because you end up with this huge action tableau resource system by the end of the 3rd round, which is really cool because you can do a lot of things where a lot of other engine builders won't allow you to actually, utilize your engine, right where the engine is building up and the game ends and it becomes anticlimactic. Well, this doesn't give you that, but it also kind of overstays just a little bit too. And that's going to be the biggest criticism as a whole. The mechanics are solid. They work together very nicely. The era structure cards are going to get stronger as you go. But again, how overpowered are those things? How much resource management is there going to be? Because this is not a game of skimping of the resources. You're going to have a plenty by the 2nd and 3rd rounds. And what combination, which order, and how tactical you can be with the flipping of some of your cards, the building of others, and just at the end of the game, the victory point scramble situation before you run out of turns is going to be the make it or break it for you. And if you feel like playing a 7 Wonders game that lasts, 2 hours, that's essentially what you've got going on here with a higher degree of complexity. But that can also be the biggest turnoff from people I've played it with, is that it just does drag a little bit with all of these elements. There is a lot to manage by the end of the 3rd round. Your tableaus will literally be, 15 to 20 cards easily, and trying to remember all of those powers, all of the interactions, especially when you have the pink ones here that are going to be flipping over and trying to manage, and when you do that and how you do that, it's not going to be as easy as it sounds. So it might just be too much of a good thing for some people as well. Again, another small make it or break it, right, is when you have this hand of cards, and especially at the higher player count, you're just not going to necessarily get the cards that are going to be behooving your engine in the best way. And sometimes by the time that hand comes around to you, you're just not going to be able to utilize things to your greatest extent. So that's going to frustrate more strategic players, but that's going to reward more tactical people who can turn on a dime and really adapt to what's been given to them, literally handed from the person next to you. All in all, it's a really solid engine building game. But again, it's a lot of management. You're going to score lots of points, and how you mitigate that, and a few just, I wonder how this one scores, and a few cards that are a little bit not as clear as you would like are present, but they don't stop the game or the flow because you just interpret them your best way of doing so, and it works out nicely in that sense. There's enough achievement cards and endgame scoring cards and expedition cards as well in terms of all of these, and so it gives it a good variability without feeling like it's overwhelming either. All of the individual parts you're going to recognize, you're going to realize what they are. It's just a combination of them and whether or not it's going to be a little bit too much for you or just right in the sweet spot. Last up here, Fabled, the Spirit Lands from Crowd Games. This is going to be a turning books into books into books into books Euro-style game with moving shared map components as you traverse your sages across these lands from point A to point B to point C, and potentially even crossing cards, depending on how clever you can be. The main mechanism of this game is essentially relatively straightforward, right? You're gathering these books, you can gather them to convert them, or you can start using those books to slot additional cards from the tableau that is shared between all players. And essentially from this good old Euro-style mechanism, what you have going on is you have the ability to gather books, convert books into other books, or gradually increase your ability to do those conversions more efficiently through use of allies or additional resource cards that are going to be at your disposal. Essentially what you're also going to be having to do with a very, potentially mean take that style of things, depending on how your play style is in the first place, is you buy these areas and these lands on the left here as sort of an open market for all players if they're willing to spend a book, a yellow, a blue, or a green. Now, why would you pay the higher books when you're ultimately just trying to turn them all into the red ones in the first place? Well, because these ones down here, the further, the more expensive, they're going to give you the better rewards, the more optimal ways of getting those red books in the first place. And so what you do is you pay, say, a blue book in this case, and I can slot this card anywhere I want. So essentially what you're doing when you're adding these cards, though, is that you can slot them wherever you want on the tableau in the first place. You could slot them to the left, you could slot them to the right, you could also, even depending on how mean you're feeling, slot them right in the middle, which creates interesting conundrums and dilemmas because, as you can see, sometimes these cards with the mountain ones have two separate paths, where this bottom path is now continued on along the blue path, but if you had a path that ended up in the top, it wouldn't go anywhere. And sometimes you have vice versa, where this new path is put in there and it doesn't connect at all to the old path. The other tricky aspect of this, though, is that when you add a path, all of the other sages on that same color terrain that you have actually get to move, and yours move further than your opponents when you're placing them out, because when you play one of these, it's the only way you're going to be getting these sages out to travel and traverse along the way to either gather these resources or to go to these special places, which are going to allow you again to get conversions, to get allies, or to unlock other abilities to help you along the way. But it has to be taken into account which one you're playing, depending on how many are out, where your sages are located, and if they reach the end and there's no end point beyond that, well, then they just are lost and go back to the reserve and they can't help you out anymore. So sometimes you want to put them where it's going to be most advantageous to you. Other times there's going to be a little bit of a mean spirit there to make sure that their sage doesn't go on to the next route to continue to get them bonuses on a turn by turn and potentially even other people's turns as well. Essentially, over this 10-round Euro-based game, as you can see here, as you progress through the rounds, certain things are going to happen when you reach certain points of the game. You may be having events get unlocked and having these things mitigate both the circumstances currently as well as an ongoing effect. You may also get the ability to get some of these allies that are going to have additional abilities immediately, but they can also be upgraded in order to take some cool effects to help you sort of turn or be more tactical with your strategic planning in the first place. And these cards are really probably the best thing of this game, because this is going to be the make it or break it for you of how well you're going to be moving these sages in order to convert these books from one level to the next. These are going to do cool things. They're going to break the game in a little bit of a good way, but they're also going to force you to change your strategy in the first place, depending on who you get from the random draw oftentimes as well, or what these event cards are going to do in the first place in the same way. And how much do you like pivoting with your strategy in the middle of a Euro game? That's going to be the big question. And the basic element of this, as I said, is turning books into books into books into books. You got your yellows to blues to greens to reds, and you're just trying to end up with the most reds at the end. And as simple as that sounds, it also is a little bit just not quite as good at the sum of the parts as I was kind of hoping. And that's going to be sort of the make it or break it for you. How zen-like do you enjoy moving these sages along a simple path? Because the rules overhead in terms of the nuance behind some of these movements and some of these actions isn't always as clear as you may like, but it also doesn't quite feel as satisfying. Sort of like the individual parts make a lot of sense. The individual parts of these allies, these events, these cards, and the combinations, and the moving across, and the take that of slotting your land in to have your sages outmaneuver all of the other people, it's a good feeling. But for some reason also, it just left me feeling, a little bit like the sum of those parts didn't quite add up to what I wanted to at the same time either. It's a beautifully elegant game, but it just does it in a completely different, almost, Seventh Continent-esque vibe. And that's going to be, a turn on and a turn off with this slotting of these map tokens as you go throughout them. And if no one is ever on a map token, then it just falls off. And so you have to be careful when that's going to happen and how that changes your plans, especially at the higher player counts, before it comes back around to you. So you're not going to be able, again, as a Eurogamer, to necessarily plan out your strategy with all of these elements, anything in advance. And that's what people may not like in that sense. The artwork is fantastic. The theme works. But as far as a Euro game goes, it's not necessarily going to give you all of those elements that you may be looking for, like I said in the first place. And depending on your mileage, that may suit you. That may also leave you just feeling a little bit wanting at the same time. But that's okay too. The other minor criticism I have to say here is that it's a little bit blurred here in terms of sometimes recognizing where you're going, how you're going. These cards are just so crowded and so well illustrated, it's almost too much on the card at the same time, if that can be actually a criticism in the first place. Like I said, these character cards, these allies, are probably the highlight of this game as a whole. You know, the artwork is fantastic, and the abilities and the ability to upgrade them potentially as you're going along just makes it all the more chaotically cruel and unusual, but also fun. But like I said, there's a little bit more overhead when you're trying to figure out how these abilities are going to interact when you've got that much text on the card telling you how this is going to work. And it's not overly complicated, but it will leave you head scratching a little bit on a turn-by-turn basis of how you're going to action optimize to your best ability. And so is that your ilk when you're looking at a game like this? If it is, great. If it's not, you know, this might be a pass. That's it. Those are the 5 games, new releases, hotness, if you will, my thoughts on them, pros, cons, and everything else in between. Hopefully that's helpful. Let me know which one you liked. Let me know if you'd like to see anything else come out of Essen. Not that I'm going to have a whole ton of releases because I'm not going to Essen, but, you know, a couple end of my collection from trades or when they actually get ported over to North America in, you know, 9 to 16 months or whatever. Anyway, that's all I got. Stay classy. Have a great day. Let me know what you think, and we'll go from there. Subscribe if you want. We're trying to hit 10K by the end of the year. I'm trying. Have a great day. See you around.